I value our friendship too much to risk it, she said when I asked about taking things further, so I respected her choice, moved on completely, and found real love. Now she's texting happy birthday 3 years later while I post engagement ring shopping videos. Paige and I had been close friends for 2 years, sharing our Friday night movie traditions and genuine conversations about everything from career goals to family drama. As an engineering consultant in Orlando, I valued consistency and authentic connections, which made our friendship feel like something rare and worth protecting. But that November evening, watching some forgettable romantic comedy on her couch, I finally worked up the courage to tell her how I really felt. Paige, I need to be honest with you about something, I said during a quiet moment between scenes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I've developed feelings for you that go beyond friendship, and I was wondering if you might feel the same way. She paused the movie and turned to face me with that gentle expression I'd grown to love, but her words cut deeper than any harsh rejection could have. Drew, I value our friendship too much to risk it, she said softly, reaching over to squeeze my hand in that comforting way that now felt like a consolation prize. I've seen too many great friendships get ruined when people try to make them into something else, and I can't bear the thought of losing what we have. I nodded and managed what I hoped was an understanding smile, telling her that I respected her decision and appreciated her honesty, even though internally I felt like someone had just explained why I'd never be good enough for the thing I wanted most. We finished the movie in manufactured normalcy, both of us pretending that nothing fundamental had just shifted between us, and I drove home with my chest feeling hollow and my mind already calculating how much distance I'd need to heal properly. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started researching engineering positions in other cities, knowing that staying close to something I couldn't have would only make everything worse. Over the following month, I implemented what I privately called my graceful exit strategy, gradually pulling back from our regular Friday movie nights and group hangouts without creating any drama or making Paige feel like she'd done something wrong. I started declining invitations with legitimate-sounding excuses about work projects and family obligations, and when I did show up to group events, I kept things light and friendly while positioning myself near other people instead of gravitating toward her like I used to. Within 2 weeks of that conversation, I'd applied for a senior engineering consultant position with an infrastructure firm in Kansas City, and their response was faster than I dared hope. They wanted me to start in 6 weeks, citing my experience with water treatment systems as exactly what their expanding Midwest operations needed. When I told our friend group about the move over drinks at our usual Thursday spot, I watched Paige's face carefully as I explained the opportunity for career advancement and the chance to lead major municipal projects. Wait, this seems really sudden, she said, her eyes searching my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. Is this because of our conversation last month? I gave her my most reassuring smile and shook my head, explaining that I'd been considering a change for months and this opportunity was too good to pass up, which was technically true even if the timing wasn't coincidental. At my goodbye party the following weekend, Paige pulled me aside near the end of the evening and slipped a braided friendship bracelet around my wrist, the kind we used to make fun of in middle school but somehow felt significant now. Promise me you'll stay in touch, she said, her voice carrying an urgency that made me wonder if she was starting to understand what she was losing. Of course, I replied, meaning it in that moment but not yet realizing this would be our last real conversation for years. Kansas City became my clean slate in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I threw myself into building an entirely new life with the methodical approach I usually reserved for engineering projects. Within my first month, I joined 2 hiking clubs, signed up for weekend cooking classes at the local Culinary Institute, and completely overhauled my social media presence by unfollowing all Orlando connections and posting photos of Missouri trails and downtown farmers markets instead of our old group hangouts. My new job at Midwest Infrastructure Solutions challenged me in ways my previous position never had, with complex water treatment projects spanning 3 states that required me to travel and collaborate with teams I genuinely respected. When Paige started texting me about her latest dating disasters and workplace drama, I responded with polite but increasingly distant pleasantries, "That sounds frustrating," or "Hope things improve," before eventually just hitting the like button on her messages without crafting the thoughtful responses she was clearly expecting. The shift became most apparent when she called me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, crying about how her apartment had been broken into and she felt unsafe and violated, needing someone to talk her through the emotional aftermath like I'd done countless times before. Instead of the hour-long comfort session she was expecting, I sent a brief text, "Sorry to hear that happened. Hope your insurance covers everything and you're staying somewhere safe tonight." The silence that followed told me she'd gotten the message that I was no longer her go-to emotional support system, though I doubt she understood why that had to change. 3 months into my Kansas City life, I discovered rock climbing at a gym downtown where I met Faith, a physical therapist whose approach to conversation felt refreshingly different. She asked about my engineering projects with genuine curiosity, shared stories about her own adventures in mountain biking and trail running, and treated our interactions like exchanges between equals rather than opportunities for her to download her problems onto someone else. "You know what I love about climbing?" Faith said during our 3rd session together, chalk dust on her hands as we discussed route strategies. "It's just you and the wall, no excuses, no one else to blame if you don't make it to the top, but also no one else's drama weighing you down." I found myself actually laughing, not the polite chuckle I'd perfected for social situations, but genuine amusement at meeting someone who understood that personal responsibility was attractive rather than burdensome. What developed between Faith and me felt fundamentally different from any relationship I'd experienced before, built on shared adventures rather than shared complaints about life's unfairness. We started mountain biking together on weekends, exploring trails through Missouri's state parks where she'd pack thoughtful lunches and I'd bring my camera to document the landscapes we discovered, and our conversations during these rides revealed someone who approached challenges with the same methodical optimism I brought to engineering problems. "I love how you think through routes," she told me one Saturday after we'd successfully navigated a particularly technical trail system. "You're not just randomly hoping for the best, you're actually planning 3 moves ahead." When I mentioned my goal of visiting all the major national parks within 5 years, Faith didn't just nod politely like most people did. She pulled out her phone and started researching which parks offer the best combination of hiking and climbing opportunities, suggesting we start planning our first trip together. My career began flourishing in ways that surprised even me, starting with a water treatment project in Springfield that came in ahead of schedule and under budget, which led to my promotion to senior consultant within 18 months and opportunities to lead infrastructure projects across Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa that challenged everything I thought I knew about municipal engineering. Meanwhile, according to the occasional updates that filtered through our mutual friends, Paige's life had become a predictable cycle of failed relationships and career stagnation, as she apparently struggled to understand why the emotional support system she'd taken for granted was no longer available whenever she needed someone to process her latest disappointment. "She keeps asking about you," our friend Marcus mentioned during a video call, sounding somewhat exasperated. "Like, constantly. She wanted to know if you were seeing anyone, if you seemed happy, if you ever mentioned missing Orlando." Through a combination of curiosity and mild concern, I eventually discovered that Paige had been subtly stalking my social media presence, viewing every story I posted about weekend trips to Colorado and professional conferences in Denver, while her own Instagram feed remained stuck in the same pattern of Orlando bar photos and complaints about dating apps failing to deliver quality men who understood what a real woman deserved. The contrast became almost comical when I posted pictures from a client presentation in Chicago where I'd been invited to speak about sustainable water infrastructure, and within hours Paige had posted a story from the same downtown Orlando sports bar she'd been frequenting for 3 years, captioned with "another disappointing night out," and tagged with 3 friends who looked equally bored. Faith noticed the pattern too, since my phone would light up with anonymous story views whenever I shared photos of our hiking adventures or my professional achievements, and she found the whole situation more amusing than threatening. "So let me get this straight," Faith said one evening as we planned our upcoming trip to Yellowstone. "This girl rejected you, you moved on and built an amazing life, and now she's basically cyberstalking you to watch what she's missing?" The situation crystallized for me during that conversation. I wasn't the one who'd moved on from something good, I was the one who'd escaped something that was never going to fulfill me and found what I actually deserved. By the time Faith and I celebrated our first year together with a climbing trip to Red River Gorge, I'd completely stopped checking whether Paige was viewing my stories, because I finally understood that her attention was irrelevant to my happiness and her absence had made space for something infinitely better. 2.5 years after leaving Orlando, I was reviewing project specifications in my corner office when my assistant knocked and said someone named Paige was there to see me, claiming to be an old friend who happened to be in town on business. My stomach dropped slightly as I realized she'd orchestrated an entire trip to Kansas City just to engineer this casual encounter, and when she walked into my office wearing a carefully chosen outfit that screamed, "successful professional woman," I could see the calculation behind her bright smile and overly enthusiastic greeting. "Drew. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually here," she said, spreading her arms wide like we were long-lost relatives. "I had a client meeting downtown and remembered you worked somewhere around here, so I thought I'd take a chance and see if you were available for lunch. I stood up and shook her hand professionally, noting how her expression flickered with confusion at the formal greeting she clearly hadn't expected, then suggested we go to a nearby restaurant where I could keep the conversation contained and time-limited. During lunch at a generic business casual place I'd chosen specifically for its lack of romantic atmosphere, I kept the conversation relentlessly professional while mentioning Faith at every opportunity, describing our recent trip to Yellowstone and our plans to tackle some of Colorado's 14ers next month. That sounds amazing, Paige said, her fork hovering over a salad she wasn't really eating. Faith must be really special for you to be planning all these adventures together. She is, I replied simply. She's a physical therapist here in Kansas City, and we both love the outdoor lifestyle this region offers. Much different pace than Orlando, but it suits us perfectly. I watched Paige process the finality in my tone, the way I'd said us, like Faith and I were a permanent unit, and how I described Orlando as something I'd moved past rather than something I missed. After an hour of polite small talk where she kept trying to steer the conversation toward our shared memories and I kept redirecting to work topics, I told her I needed to get back for a client call, and she looked genuinely shocked that I wasn't extending the visit or suggesting we meet again before she left town. It was good to see you, I said as we parted ways on the sidewalk, and the carefully neutral phrase clearly wasn't what she'd hoped to hear. Within a week, the texts started arriving in a completely different tone than her previous casual updates, long messages filled with specific memories about our friendship and subtle suggestions that she'd made a mistake in not appreciating what we had. I was thinking about that time we drove to Cocoa Beach and got caught in that thunderstorm, read one message. Remember how we sat in your car for 2 hours just talking about everything? I miss having someone who really understood me like that. I read it, put my phone away, and went back to reviewing engineering reports without responding. Her messages grew longer and more desperate over the following weeks, transitioning from nostalgia to direct statements about reconsidering our friendship dynamic, but I either didn't respond at all or sent brief, polite replies that gave her nothing to build on. Hope you're doing well, became my standard response when I responded at all, a phrase that acknowledged her message without encouraging further communication. The fake emergencies started about a month later, beginning with a family crisis text at 10 p.m. claiming her father had been rushed to the hospital and she needed someone to talk to who really knew her family situation. Instead of calling like she clearly expected, I ordered flowers to be delivered to the hospital with a card expressing my hopes for her father's quick recovery, a gesture that was thoughtful enough to avoid seeming heartless but impersonal enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. When she texted the next day to thank me for the flowers and mentioned that her dad was fine but she'd really needed to hear a familiar voice, I didn't respond at all. According to Marcus, who'd grown tired of being Paige's intermediary for Drew-related information, her Orlando friends had started distancing themselves as she became increasingly obsessed with getting Drew back and couldn't participate in group conversations without somehow steering them toward analyzing my social media posts or speculating about whether Faith and I were really serious. She's honestly become kind of exhausting, Marcus admitted during one of our quarterly catch-up calls. Every time we hang out, she finds a way to bring you up, and when people try to change the subject, she gets defensive and says we don't understand how special your friendship was. The irony wasn't lost on me that Paige had finally realized the value of what she'd rejected, but only after watching me build something better with someone who'd recognized my worth from the beginning. 3 years to the day after I'd left Orlando, my birthday arrived with the kind of crisp October morning that made Kansas City feel like home, and I was enjoying coffee with Faith when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't heard from in months. Happy birthday, Drew. I can't believe it's been 3 years since you moved away. I was just thinking about your 26th birthday when we went to that terrible mini-golf place and you insisted on keeping score even though half the holes were broken. Remember how competitive you got about that windmill hole? I miss those easy times when we could just be ourselves without any complications. I know things got weird before you left, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about that conversation we had. Maybe I was scared of ruining something good, but now I wonder if I missed out on something even better. I hope you're happy out there, but I also hope you remember that some connections are too special to just disappear. Would love to catch up properly if you're ever in town or if you want to video chat sometime. Hope your day is amazing. The message was clearly crafted to sound casual while hitting every emotional button she could think of, mentioning specific memories that only we shared and ending with an opening for renewed contact that tried to sound natural rather than desperate. I read it twice, felt absolutely nothing beyond mild irritation at the manipulation attempt, and put my phone face down on the kitchen counter without responding. Everything okay? Faith asked, noticing my expression, and when I showed her the message, she raised her eyebrows and shook her head with amused disbelief. Wow, she really went all out for that one. Timing's pretty incredible too, considering what we're doing today. She was right about the timing, because we'd planned to spend the afternoon at Jefferson Jewelers downtown, looking at engagement rings that Faith had been subtly pointing out during our recent discussions about the future. At the jewelry store, I posted an Instagram story of our intertwined hands over a display case full of diamond rings, with the caption, "Big decisions ahead," and a heart emoji, not thinking about who might see it until my phone started ringing 20 minutes later. The caller ID showed Paige's number, the first time she'd actually called me in over a year, and I immediately declined the call and watched as she tried twice more before apparently giving up. "Let me guess," Faith said, watching my phone buzz with voicemail notifications while we examined a particularly beautiful solitaire setting. "Someone saw our story and had some feelings about it." When we got home that evening, I played the voicemail on speaker so Faith could hear Paige's rambling, slightly breathless message about wanting to catch up properly, and how she'd been thinking a lot about us lately, and maybe we could video chat this weekend to really reconnect as friends. Her voice carried that forced casual tone people use when they're trying to sound unaffected while clearly falling apart, and she ended with, "I know you're probably busy with work and everything, but I really think we should talk soon, like really talk, you know?" Before the message cut off mid-sentence. Faith and I looked at each other across the kitchen counter, and she started laughing first, which made me laugh too, at the absurdity of someone trying to reinsert themselves into a life they'd rejected right at the moment when that life was reaching its highest point. "Should I feel bad about how perfect this timing is?" Faith asked, still giggling. "Because I kind of love that she's watching you move on to the most important commitment of your life." That night, I blocked Paige's number on everything, deleted the voicemail without listening to it completely, and spent the evening researching hot air balloon companies in Missouri because I decided exactly how I wanted to propose to the woman who'd never made me question my worth. 6 weeks later, on a perfect November morning with the Missouri River stretching out below us like a ribbon of gold, I proposed to Faith as our hot air balloon drifted silently through the sunrise, and her immediate yes came through tears of pure joy that had nothing to do with obligation or settling for someone safe. "I can't believe you planned all this," she said, looking at the ring I'd chosen based on months of observing what she actually liked rather than what I thought would impress other people, and the way she kissed me felt like coming home to a place I'd never known I was searching for. When we posted our engagement announcement that evening, a simple photo of Faith's hand in mine with the river valley in the background and a caption about finding your perfect adventure partner, the response from our Kansas City friends and my work colleagues was immediate and genuinely enthusiastic, people who'd watched our relationship develop and knew we'd built something solid. Within hours, according to Marcus who called to congratulate me, the news had reached our Orlando friend group, and apparently Paige had created a fake Instagram account to view our photos since she'd been blocked from my real accounts, spending what Marcus described as an embarrassing amount of time analyzing every detail of our announcement post. The final message came through Marcus himself 2 days later, a carefully crafted note that Paige had asked him to pass along, expressing congratulations while also mentioning how she'd always known I'd find someone special and hoped we could reconnect as friends someday, now that I was clearly happy and settled. "She seemed to think this would be, like, a natural time for you guys to be friends again," Marcus explained, sounding skeptical. "Because you're engaged now, so there's no romantic tension anymore or whatever." I asked Marcus not to pass along any more messages from Paige, explaining that some chapters need to stay closed for everyone's well-being, and he agreed with obvious relief that he wouldn't have to play messenger anymore. Faith and I threw ourselves into wedding planning with the same methodical enthusiasm we brought to our hiking adventures, and when she suggested we have the ceremony at a state park in Colorado where we'd climbed our first mountain together, I knew I'd found someone who understood that the best celebrations honor the journey rather than just announcing the destination. "I love that you need complete closure from your past," Faith told me one evening as we addressed invitations to people who'd actually supported our relationship. "It shows you know the difference between being polite and being healthy, and I never want you to feel like you have to apologize for choosing what's best for us." Looking back now, as we plan our honeymoon adventure through Utah's national parks and Faith researches the best climbing routes while I map out the photography locations, I finally understand that Paige rejecting me wasn't a judgment on my worth. It was the universe making space for someone who would recognize exactly what I had to offer and choose to build something extraordinary with it.